special. Now, this show is about celebrating, of course, but it's also about learning. And our next two guests are here with insight on the lexicon of language of LGBTQ2 plus communities. Joining me are artist and author Vivek, Shraya, and Keith McCrady. Welcome to you both.
Hi, Tracy.
Good morning.
Hi. Keith, I'm going to start with you. For our viewers who aren't familiar with what it means to be two-spirited, can you please explain?
Well, being two-spirited means a lot of different things to different people, but I think from my experience, it's an umbrella term that was created to describe, the various definitions that people have been using. The simplest way that I could explain it is it could mean one of three things. One, it's part of the 2S LGBTQ spectrum, meaning like as an Indigenous man who's gay, I would be part of that as a two-spirited person. And for those people who that's how they identify, that's totally accurate. And then there's people who identify it as a gender identity. So I'm nor male nor female, I am two-spirited. And again, that's also correct because that's what they know and that's their truth. But then for me, being two-spirited is a role and a responsibility in our community. As Indigenous people, we believe we're all on a sacred circle, and two-spirit identity is part of that, and it's something that people have to take responsibility of. And usually those are people who have both masculine and feminine roles and responsibilities and spirits.
Excellent. Okay, Vivek, can you speak a little bit to how powerful a tool languages, and that's why we're talking about it right now, and how it can perpetuate particular societal views and how it can also perpetuate othering?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think about is the ways in which often in our culture, when we're talking about something we don't like or a negative, we often use language that's associated with marginalized communities. For instance, the word dumb or crazy or so gay. These are words that have become, or phrases or descriptions that have become so popular in our culture, but people don't always realize that they're using ableist language or homophobic language. And so I think it's really important for us to be thinking about what words we're using, because every time we use gay as a negative when we don't like a movie, what people in our community, what we hear is that there's essentially something wrong with us or negative about us.
Absolutely. Okay, very good point. I want to talk about the LGBTQ. Letters have been added, numbers have been added, a plus has been added at the end to make sure that it's completely inclusive, but it's really evolving. And I would love, Keith, for you to speak to the fact that adding letters or adding groups into this umbrella group doesn't mean that these groups just spontaneously developed. They've been here all along, but there wasn't the language to mark these groups. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. The one thing that I remember being young Indigenous man was hearing the word two-spirited, but I really didn't understand what it meant and what it meant to me. But I lived my life, growing up and learning and, getting ceremony and traditions, and came out as a gay Indigenous man at the age of 26. But I didn't come out, just so to speak, or identify as two-spirited up until my 40s, where I took on this role and responsibility. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, those experiences and that didn't exist before. For me, I was always a two-spirited person, but it's just the way that I understood it and respected this role. And the same way that, we all have these experiences, and just because someone doesn't know, like there could be a young child who's, born asexual, and their family doesn't have the same information or language to describe this, or knowledge or openness. It doesn't mean that they're still going to have these same experiences, and it won't take away from that. I really loved, as we saw the LGBTQ2S expand, but the one thing I try to champion is putting 2S first, because we know in Canada that being two-spirited or being Indigenous really hasn't been a positive thing. And I think if we put 2S in front of the LGBTQ, it really reminds us where we have to go, and that two-spirited people really should be highlighted in this in a way, in a brave way, to say, yeah, we've forgotten a lot of people. And I think this will also highlight all the other people who have been forgotten.
Vivek, if you wouldn't mind, I would love, there are so many words that are being used these days that are new for so many people, and one of them is cisgender. Do you mind giving us a bit of an explanation about what that means?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, my understanding of the word cisgender is that it speaks to an individual who feels that they identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. So, for instance, Tracy, when you were born, and if the doctor assigns you as female and you feel like you are female or you feel like you're a girl or a woman, then you would identify as cisgender.
There are words that have been reclaimed by marginalized communities that I'm going to give you the example of the N-bomb used in the Black community all the time. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want to hear it coming particularly from someone outside of the community. Are there words reclaimed by your community that you don't want to hear anyone else using?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you two quick examples. I think queer is an example of a word that has a negative history, a word that was used to oppress, LGBTQ people. And I do think it's okay if you're not part of the community to use the word in certain contexts. So, for instance, if you're saying, I want to be an ally to queer people, or I want to support the queer community, I think that those are, acceptable ways to use the word. I think always when you're using words like this, it's good to use caution. On the opposite end of the spectrum is a word faggot. That's a word that I, heard a lot growing up. And, for the longest time, I was like, I never want to hear this word. And I know that within our communities, we've reclaimed that word. It's taken me a long time to own that word personally. But that's one word that if you're not part of the community, under no circumstances you want to be using.
Yeah, and I feel like we all know on a subconscious level, like, just don't go there.
Sure do.
But for some reason, it needs to be repeated again and again. So thank you for your candor. And thank you so much for joining us today, Vivek and Keith.